We're having one or two issues with Zoom, but hopefully these will not prevent people from being able to join the meeting. So I'd like to start by handing over to Meredith Jones, who's the Director of the Institute for Community and Society, to give us a little introduction to our seminar today. Thanks, Meredith.
Thanks, Kate, and thank you for inviting me to introduce. It is my great honour to be here. The heat wave was amazing, wasn't it? And I would have been very little use to you on those days because, in fact, to my great shame as an Australian, I got heat stroke. Yes, and if anyone's never had it, you do hallucinate and it's quite extraordinary. Anyway, putting that to one side, thanks for inviting me and welcome everyone to Brunel University and indeed to, a virtual event that's also hosted by the Institute of Communities and Society. Our institute hasn't been going very long. In fact, it's just over a year. And funding for this particular project about which you're going to hear today, and many of you participate, this was one of the first things the Institute funded. And I have to say it's really one of the best sets of projects that we've been involved in. And so thanks to Kate and Emma for their extraordinary, insightful hard work and vision around this project. The ICS does very much focus on interdisciplinary work. And we're also very much in favour and in support of work that directly engages communities and individuals who may be particularly disadvantaged and or marginalised. And so this particular project fits all of those boxes really, really well. And it's one we're particularly proud of. I'm not going to really say anything more except congratulations, Kate and Emma, for bringing this to fruition. I'm really looking forward to hearing more about the project, and I hope you all have an absolutely lovely research seminar. Thank you.
That's lovely. Thank you so much, Meredith. And we're really pleased that you're able to come today and introduce the event. I should also say that this event is hosted by the Education, Identity and Society's research group, which sits within the Department of Education at Brunel University. What we're going to do today with these two papers is talk to you a little bit about the journey that we've gone on, that Emma and I have gone on. We started with a little project during COVID, and it was that piece of work that led to the bigger project that was funded by ICS. So we're going to start today just by presenting from that first project to tell you a little bit about how we got interested and how we've developed the work from there. So the first paper Emma has very kindly agreed to present. We're going to have a paper, then we're going to have some time for questions and comments and discussion, and then we're going to have the second paper. And we may well have a little bit of time at the end for some wider discussion across the two papers. So the first paper, which comes from the work that Emma and I did during COVID, is around household enactments of education during COVID-19 pandemic among low-income families of primary age children. So Emma, it's over to you. Thanks very much, and I hope you enjoy the first paper. And lovely to see so many of you.
I'm just going to share my screen, hopefully. Kate, if you can give me a nod, can you see that okay? Great, okay, lovely. So yeah, good morning. It's lovely to see so many people here. As Kate said, this is a paper that we worked on, oh gosh, a little while ago now. It was coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic and focusing in particular on low income families. And the research was very much aimed at finding out how policy made at the national scale was enacted at the household scale. So not only what form homeschool took, but the broader implications of the requirement to homeschool within the home and on the family. And really, in terms of today's seminar, part of what we'll be discussing here is the particular challenges of recruiting these families for the research. And what this tells us more broadly about researching experiences of low-income families. So, move my slide on. There we go. You won't need to be reminded of this, I'm sure, but by way of background, obviously the lockdown in March 2020 resulted in school closures in England. It moved formal education and the responsibility of learning into the home for most children. And then between September and December 2020, schools were fully reopened, but many children then experienced further and recurrent periods of homeschooling due to self-isolation and school staff shortages. And then once again, schools closed in January 2021, opening in March, again with children missing school due to COVID infections. So we know that home was marked as the front line in the battle against COVID. And so this centered the burden of educating children within the family and placed new expectations on parents and on carers. And homeschooling experiences vary very widely due to school expectations and demands, but also because of the resources available to children and families to undertake homeschooling. And a letter from the Prime Minister at the beginning of last year worked with a very functionalist idea of home, so praising parents while pledging to provide support for homeschooling through access to laptops, free school meals, catch-up programs. So the Prime Minister at the time was very keen to note not only the homeschool role of parents and carers in terms of what they were doing for their own families, but thinking about the importance of this for the national COVID approach. So as the COVID situation continued to unfold, our project was interested in how low-income families were able to enact homeschooling and the challenges that, in particular, that they faced. And I'll just go through this quite quickly, but this was the set of ideas that we were working with our research. The first and main one was around policy enactment theory. So examining how national policies are translated and enacted at the local level. Much of the work in this field, and certainly in education, does look at the role of practitioners within particular institutional settings or contexts. So teachers in particular within schools and their interpretation and their enactment of policy. So policy is mediated through personal and professional practice. And this highlights the level of professional agency and also highlights what sometimes is a conflict, I suppose, between policymakers' intentions and then the realities of implementation. And this is really key to understanding the dynamism of policy. And our project wasn't looking at professionals or practitioners, but at families. So there was no mediation here by professionals. Rather, it was the requirement for homeschool, how that was propelled, the policy was propelled into the home for families to enact. But this is potentially really interesting because it reveals the tensions between national and local practices, priorities and resources. The second set of ideas is really intersectionality, thinking how social class, gender, ethnicity, all of these things influence parents' experiences of enacting homeschool alongside caring work and paid employment. So drawing on an intersectional approach has really encouraged us to explore the complex subjectivities and circumstances of families' experiences. So opening up a space to move beyond more one-dimensional forms of analysis, to investigate and theorize the operation of intersectional identity as something that's complex and contradictory. And then thirdly, the work of Sophie Bowlby and Eleanor Jupp on carescapes really highlights the links between home and the practices and relationships of care. And this really weaves through our consideration of home here, recognising that home has come under intense pressure. Homeschooling required new caring relationships and caring dynamics. And of course, the growing literature now on parental engagement in children's learning and education, and recognising that the so-called good, responsible parent has underpinned the development of homeschool relationships in recent years. Parents are active partners in their children's education. So relationality filters through our framing here, a focus on relations with a home and the changing relations between home, school, home and the state as well. So in terms of our data collection, the paper was based on 6 family interviews, and we'd hoped for more, but it was we only managed to get 6, and this is something we're going to talk about. And these are family interviews, so interviewing both the parent and the child. And our recruitment of low-income families was based primarily on free school meal allocation, which itself is based on receipt of state benefits and an annual income, or state benefits and an annual income of less than £7,400. And we recognise this is quite a crude measure, really, that doesn't indicate the complexity of everyday lives. For example, it fails to recognise the precarity of many families who are reliant on insecure, low-paid work and without additional financial security. However, for this project focused on schooling with a small sample size, it was just a measure that we could consistently draw a parallel, I suppose, across the participants. So family recruitment was via the support of a national charity that operates within the London area, with snowballing through initial participants. And a total of 6, as I said, family interviews were conducted, and the table here tells you a little bit about them. The interviews were all conducted online, and we gave the families a £25 shopping voucher as a thank you for their time. And in spite of a recruitment strategy that invited parents and carers with primary age children very generally, those engaged in the research were all mothers, as you can see, with 5 of the 6 being lone parents as well. And given the research topic, this is probably not that surprising, because as we know, schooling and childcare responsibilities did fall disproportionately on mothers during COVID. And this is an important aspect of identity, which we'll discuss a little bit further in the data analysis. And I suppose with parental engagement in education linked to social class inequalities, Wilson talks about the important role of gatekeepers in ensuring groups who are typically hard to reach are also not hard to research. And I think this is very important for what we're thinking about today. So as I said, recruitment was challenging. And it was a slow process, even with a charity supporting us, and a charity that works very much, very locally and on the ground, and acting as our gatekeeper and being able to offer the voucher. We sensed, I think, time and again, a real reluctance or hesitation among parents to reflect back on this particular period of time. For many reasons that I'll discuss later when I talk about some of the findings. There was a sense of struggle and sometimes a sense of shame in their competence. It was a very emotionally charged time. And even some potential participants who came forward expressing initial enthusiasm, when they then looked at the consent form and when they looked at the participant information sheet, then just went quiet. And again, this is something that we'll think about, especially we'll pull through to the second paper today. All of the interviews were conducted at a distance via Zoom. And interviewing is a dialogue and an encounter between at least 2 people. But the use of Zoom obviously configures this a little differently to the normal face-to-face positioning. And we used Zoom for various reasons, mainly because of the continued COVID-19 social distancing restrictions at the time, but also project time frame, participant availability, research restrictions, and so on. And of course, emerging from COVID, Zoom and other platforms such as this and access to technology has become more pronounced than ever. But at the same time, we recognise that the material deprivation among some families and families we were trying to access does limit that access and therefore hinder participation. So Zoom meant we were physically dislocated from our participants, yet by asking about their everyday lives and experiences, we were focusing on issues of relationality and their struggle. And so these conversations exposed risk and vulnerability, and it did require an opening up of trust on the part of participants. And I suppose on reflection, we were quite surprised at the richness, the extent and depth of the data from the parents and the fluency of some of those interviews. And previous research has found that online interviews do give participants more freedom and confidence sometimes to disclose personal and sensitive information without feeling judged, without feeling inhibited. And it allowed us to kind of prise open, I suppose, some of the challenges that participants had faced. And it also allowed participants to locate themselves in a safe, a comfortable, a familiar space, free perhaps from kind of institutional surveillance or anything like that, and gave them a little bit more confidence. For the younger children, though, the Zoom interviews were more challenging, and they gave quite brief responses to our question, and certainly a limitation to the research that we've been mindful of here. But in spite of that, we have analysed the assembled narratives into thinking about spatialities, temporalities, identities and costs involved in their homeschooling experience, which I will go through now. Spatialities relate to limited space, sharing space and spatial isolation. And all the mothers we spoke to talked about limited material space and the limitations of their home. So for Rosa, who was recently separated from her husband and had 5 children, the family had to negotiate and carve up home space to accommodate children's learning. So in her and her daughter's recollections, these negotiations actually worked quite well, so that space for peace and quiet could be found for her primary age children. And this required her secondary age children to share a bedroom upstairs so that they could do their work. For Alicia, and I'll let you read the quotes yourself, with 3 children, she explained how they were able to divide up their 3-bedroom flat to ensure her 2 older children again had somewhere to learn. And she talks about, you know, her little one here and having to sort of keep them occupied. And the examples from Rosa and Alicia demonstrate the need to reconstruct, to reconfigure limited space and create new spatial boundaries within the home. And as Alicia articulates, the work of maintaining these boundaries fell to her with the need to keep her 2-year-old busy, in spite of her husband being at home, having lost his job. And this is very much an example of the gendered boundary work with women setting up and then needing to maintain new family practices during this time, allowing homeschool to proceed. Rita spoke about using the limited space flexibly, with homeschool taking place in different places, including in the bedroom and on the sofa, and home spaces were frequently repurposed to become spaces for learning, as well as sites for necessary and continued social and domestic reproduction. For Carla, one of the children in the sample, she did her schoolwork mainly on the kitchen table, and she enjoyed this because she could eat her breakfast and lunch at the same time as doing her work. And recently, Asna and colleagues in a study of home space and stress looked at perceived or actual deficiencies of individuals' home indoor spaces and how they became particularly salient during lockdown periods. And this resulted in increased stress. And in our research, mothers expressed how homeschooling was often a stressful process. And Michelle articulates this and the difficulty of dealing with the stresses when you are constantly stuck and confined to the limits of home. And I think this also shows, this quote from Michelle shows the depth of emotion experienced during homeschooling. So limited space required Michelle to seek out new space where she could fleetingly express those emotions at needing to support her daughter with schoolwork while continuing her own studies. She was a full-time student. And as again, more recent research has shown that care responsibilities were very much downloaded onto women to absorb during lockdown periods, with many experiencing feelings of guilt and distress while lacking themselves the support that they needed. Wrestling with limited space was an ongoing process of spatial negotiation, as home had to be shared. It was a shared space. So normal routines of work and school that take people out of the home had gone, and home became a space to be shared on a continuous basis. And the impact of this, of sharing space, varied depending upon family circumstances. For Alicia, it often meant strict delimitations for family members about separating children and putting them in separate spaces. So as articulated in this quote from Alicia, this constant need to ensure everyone was in place and on task was emotionally tiring and stressful. The emotional labour of these mothers involved in homeschooling was quite apparent. For Patricia's daughter, for Patricia and her daughter has a hearing impairment. Sharing space was a particular struggle because it wasn't just about sharing space with other people, which for her was just her mum. It was with pets, it was with noises within the home. And both Patricia and Tia relay this here, the difficulties experienced in online learning. So the idea of home space being shared, not just between people, but between things and domestic tasks, was a significant challenge for family members. And so spatial conflicts exist not only in the kind of human to human, which we often focus on, but also in the human to non-human relations within the home. So as Rita explains, it was difficult for her 5-year-old, Alina, to understand that home was a space now for schoolwork, as it ordinarily was a place of play, a place which holds all of her toys. So the enactment of homeschooling was spatially stressful in this way. The sharing space was stressful. And so homeschooling also brought about this paradoxical relationship or experience. So simultaneous spatial concentration, but also spatial isolation. And despite the persistent necessity to share what was often quite limited space with others, the stay home requirement created that spatial isolation through confinement, making home a particularly intense experience between parents and children. And Patricia explains this in the first quote here. The second and third quotes come from 2 of the children, and the children we spoke to, the enjoyment of Google Classroom and Zoom classroom sessions, particularly in the second lockdown, was very much framed by the opportunity to see friends on a regular basis, something that they had missed, although that social interaction was very limited. And the importance of social interaction beyond the home was highlighted by parents, recognising that spatial confinement through homeschooling has had a negative impact. So Rita discusses in relation to her daughter, Alina, and Alina's development here. And research has begun to discuss these concerns about children's social and emotional struggles from confinement to isolation within the home and from friends. And home-based remote contact was not a sufficient replacement for regular human contact within the school setting. And I think in our research, it was Tia who best captured the contrast of homeschooling to being back at school, as she gleefully explained returning to school and the excitement of that for her. And homeschool, of course, turned usual routines on their head and required the quick establishment of new ones. And parents spoke of struggling with this. So Patricia, who was suffering with her own mental health, explained the importance of the normal daily routine for her. And for Rita, with a daughter with autism, the disturbance to the usual routine was similarly something that was very, very challenging. And she continued, Rita did, to say that it needed to be the right time when Alina could settle, as this wasn't the same as school. And substantial disruption to the normal everyday rhythms of life was particularly challenging for some individuals to cope with. Again, research is showing the importance of preserving daily routines for those especially with mental health issues and for children with special educational needs. And this certainly tallies with the experiences of parents in our research. And as expressed by Patricia, who struggled with her own mental health, as I said. In contrast, Carla, Laura's daughter, spoke of how much she enjoyed the new routine because it gave her more time, as she didn't have to get up early in the morning, she wasn't rushing. The schedule wasn't dictated by school, but it was now more determined by her. So old timings and routines were shaken out, which for some people took away their structured day, while for others, notably the children we spoke to, gave them some agency in terms of start and finish times of a new school day and the pace of getting through their work. And that children could exercise some agency during these lockdowns is really important, because it highlights their experiences of homeschooling periods and the active role that they had in policy enactment. And so policy enactment is a relational process, and new times and routines impelled new relations within the home. And Michelle best articulates this in terms of the change from supporting Anna with just with weekend homework to now that being a daily requirement of parental input. So it was every day, and it was the amount of time that was needed. And this was linked both to the intensity of time and the one-to-one learning that Michelle pursued with her daughter, meaning that Anna couldn't escape. A contrast Michelle felt to what was happening in schools, or what would happen in school when her daughter was one of 30 children. And this led to new and challenging situations for parents. So the rhythms of homeschool were never settled, despite attempts by parents often to create new and stable routines for their children. The need to find the time to homeschool was discussed, often with a sense of lacking time. Even though everyone was at home, there was still a sense of lacking time. Rita says this about having to find time to be organised, to be prepared. New forms of temporal organisation were necessary and felt very keenly by mothers, especially those who were engaged in paid employment or studying. So Laura says about the need with work and time and everything else, that she couldn't put what she needed into it. For others, for Alicia and Michelle, who were both full-time students, while they had some flexibility in their timetables, they still needed to find the time and space to engage with their own online lessons and assessment requirements alongside those of their children. As Rita explains, homeschooling extended beyond the online meetings as well, because at the end of the day, parents needed to photograph and upload their children's work to prove to school that their children were engaging. So this not only stretched out the homeschool day and activities, but was felt to be a further form of scrutiny through which schools could assess whether parents were engaging in their children's learning. So a new configuration, I suppose, of parental expectations. And for Michelle, homeschooling enabled her to find more time for Anna's learning. And she was very active in her daughter's schooling. And Michelle was aware that Anna wasn't enjoying school and making progress. And so she used this as a time to catch up. It was an opportunity to catch up. And as Anna, Michelle's daughter, expressed through her body language, this at first came with a lot of resentment because she knew her friends weren't doing this at all. So time was used differently by parents depending upon what their circumstances were. And Michelle's experiences, as I've just been talking about, as catch-up, were at odds with the other mothers in our cohort. And in discussing the return into school, lost time and missed time came up as key themes. So for Rita, it was a sense of regret that her daughter wouldn't be able to do reception again, recognising that it was such an important stage for language and reading development. Alicia explained how she felt homeschool hadn't been proper learning time, and so her son Kareem had actually regressed in his learning. And Rosa explained that the quality of learning between homeschool really differed. And then for Laura, it was a more recent reflection on receiving her daughter's first school report since Carla had returned to school. And Carla's report had left Laura with a perceived sense of inadequacy, as she had not been able to support Carla in the way that she would have liked. And much of this stems from the fact that, as parents spoke about, they are not teachers, they are parents, and it's a different role. So they were concerned about the challenges of them teaching content that they themselves had very limited understanding of. So Laura experienced constant arguments with her 8-year-old daughter and had to reduce her work hours to look after and better support her. Carla, Laura's daughter, then spoke of not having the support and being left to work things out by herself. Patricia here, the third quote down, repeated Laura's words in many ways, reflecting on her lack of education. You know, I'm not a teacher, I'm not educated. And for Rosa, it was the quality of learning that she was concerned about, and concerned about her own ability, especially to teach her secondary age children who were working towards exams. And we've seen that at the national level, with tracking of SATs, it's shown a year-on-year drop since the pandemic. And early studies of learning loss, COVID learning loss, have found primary age children have been impacted more than secondary age children due to their inability to undertake learning on their own. And so the unspoken reliance on others, of parents mainly within the home. And this is translated to the realities of our participants' home, the sense of lost time, attendant learning lost, and it left parents feeling that they weren't able, didn't have the ability to support their children in the way that they needed. While many families are reported to have saved money, as we will have seen from the news, during successive lockdown periods, the Resolution Foundation found that spending increased for many low-income families, notably in relation to food and energy costs. And our participants reflected on this, of the costs of feeding their families, linked to them being at home all the time and not receiving a lunch at school, especially so in the early stages of lockdown, as Rita talks about here. It was difficult with money and everyone being at home, extra to cook, more people to feed, but also because the options for getting food changed. And Patricia explains this here in relation to now shopping online with Tesco and the change that that meant for her budget. The closure of schools also meant children from low-income families lost an important hot meal. Initially, the UK government, as we know, refused to make alternative provisions, but that did change with, you know, campaigns led by Marcus Rashford, so that vouchers were made available to the poorest families over summer. And all the families we spoke to were receiving these vouchers from school, and some were also receiving additional food packages. And Laura here was receiving a fortnightly charity fruit and veg box, as well as the vouchers and help with gas payments. But this, as she said, just felt her feeling, in her words, crap when you're not self-sufficient. And alongside these issues of food insecurity and rising costs, of course, it was about gaining access to online materials provided by schools. This created significant challenges, and it often meant hard choices, like reallocating food or heating money, or relying on wider family help. As in the case of Laura here, she talks about her mum offering to help. So the cost of homeschooling, acquiring technology and additional study materials was very significant for families. Rita and Patricia talk here about the support from their school, about trying to get support from their school for their children to access their schoolwork in an appropriate way. An experience of chasing school that wasn't a pleasant experience and not something that she wanted to do. So it's a really tough time in terms of just, you know, the costs of what it meant to be able to homeschool. So just to draw some of this to a conclusion, and really 2 points to conclude, and really what this tells us about why, I suppose, it has been so difficult to recruit for this project and to talk about this issue with low-income families. All of the participants, and hopefully you've got a sense of that through our findings, highlighted the effort, the affect and the emotion of homeschooling. And although this is probably the case for families across the UK, it took on a particular inflection for low-income families, some of which we've touched on already. So while the children expressed happiness often at having a period away from school, in spite of missing friends, their mothers here expressed these negative affects and emotions. And the quote from Laura demonstrates some of this, and a sense of lacking as a parent and feeling guilty. And researchers pointed to the stresses of managing competing demands during this time. So guilt for not meeting children's needs, worry over children's socio-economic well-being and their learning. And certainly all parents spoke about doing something wrong in their enactment of homeschool, with these feelings of anxiety, of guilt, of letting their children down, and a sense of failure and a sense of shame in this, of not being able to do things properly, not being able to do things in the right way. So a sense of doing something wrong. And the work by Strong here, I think is really useful, his work on shame. And he discusses how shame exists in a socio-spatial nexus in an effective economy and is linked to a broader politics of inequality. And I think this is certainly true in the accounts of homeschooling that we've seen. And we suggest in part accounts for the reluctance of families to be involved in the research and to share their experiences because they feel so badly about themselves in relation to it. Secondly, Trowler, in talking about enactment of policy, discusses how, well, what can be thought of as a space for creative reinvention through the agency required for implementation. And we can see in some of the narratives, perhaps what can be referred to as a pushback on government dictated expectations of homeschool and school dictated activities. And the 3 quotes here from Laura, Patricia and Rita demonstrate that families didn't always follow the expected homeschool activities, but offered new types of learning with and beyond the home. So whether it was baking, whether it was going out, whether it was doing things a little differently, this can to some extent be interpreted as the assertion of some active agency and decision making. But at the same time, I think it needs to be recognised that though there is agency in the most challenging of situations, this needs to be tempered by the acknowledgement of the socio-spatial and economic constraints that these low-income families were facing, and what this can also tell us about trying to work with these groups in particularly challenging circumstances. And we can think about this as we move forward to what has become known as the cost of living crisis. And I shall leave it there.
Emma, thank you so much. That was such an interesting presentation. I really enjoyed that. And it made me think again about our data and the fact that we could only get a policy change in the UK around free school meals when a footballer started a campaign. It didn't come from our politicians. It's still seems impossible. Right, it'd be really lovely to open the floor now to some questions and comments that Emma and I, of course, will be happy to take. Paula.
Hi, thank you so much. That really is that's quite insightful. I'm quite taken by one of the themes that came out in terms of the identities, in terms of one of your participants saying that I am not a teacher, because in a strange sort of way, the whole notion of parent and caregiver and all the rest of it is that there is that kind of concern for the learning and development of children, isn't there? So whether or not, you know, you're dealing with the cognitive, the affective, and the emotional domains, whether or not whether you see that in terms of it much more driven by cognition and the fact that you had a curriculum and an environment, that this was, I don't know, it's just curious to sort of push that line of thought forward a little bit.
Yeah, actually, our other paper, which we're working on at the moment, is called "I Am Not a Teacher."
The nature-nurture debate, isn't it, and the role of parenting anyway, and how parents do see themselves very much as part of that process. But when it comes to a new, I suppose, a new domain, you know, teaching and what everything about schooling has to offer, and just an interesting kind of complexity there.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Paula, and it's so bound up, I think. I mean, Emma can come in and comment here. I think it's so bound up in their socio-economic status and the sense of not being good enough as an educator, not being able to replace what was provided by the school.
The other thought that occurred to me, if I can just say that, and that is to do with those parents who are out there who actually by choice decide that they're going to do homeschooling, and to see whether or not, you know, some of your themes might translate in terms of what their particular purposes and aims and thoughts are behind that, whether or not, you know, you're dealing with different kinds of parents, or, you know, what their motivation is. No, I'm going to homeschool. So there's a whole dialogue there that
yeah, I think that's really interesting, Paula. I mean, my very limited understanding of the majority of families that homeschool is that they are more middle class. It's more of a middle class phenomena, because I think for the parents we were talking to, there was a real lack of confidence around education, which stemmed back from their own education, and therefore not being clever enough, not knowing enough to be able to support their children. You know, even the primary aged children, obviously it's the, you know, talking about key stage 1, key stage 2, but, you know, even with that, not having the confidence and also the recognition that, you know, often children learn things quite differently to when, you know, parents themselves going back to their own schooling and thinking about how they did it. There was always that sense of lacking as a parent.
But thank you, very thought-provoking, and some rich data, very rich data there.
Thank you, Paula. Antoine.
Yeah, I'm going to be a slightly can you hear me? Am I okay? And my speaker's a bit funny. So it's slightly controversial in a sense that because I think what you've done is great, and I think the only unfortunate thing there is how small the data set is, and I think what we don't do well at Brunel and our facilitators do well is to kind of, you know, sort of marry up the work that we do. So we Urban Scholars, and I'm now acting director of the Urban Scholars program, having lost the other co-director. I mean, we have 30 schools that we work with, and we're constantly having conversations with parents, and many of our, the issues that you raised were very relevant for our scholars, in fact, because we also found with our scholars, and they're slightly older, so we started year 9, but also we're starting to feel the pressure of engaging with younger scholars or younger pupils, and we're doing that through parents, aren't we? So we have parents whose kids are on the program, and we engage with them because they're younger kids they want on the program. So what we found is that even though the kids were eligible for IT, sort of laptops and things of that nature during the lockdown, none of our kids got it. Even though our kids were eligible for tutoring, for that national tutoring scheme, none of our kids got it. And part of it is because they were pupil premium identified, but they're also identified as having a higher, sort of ability as it were, i.e. them coming onto the program. So it's almost like something was canceled out just because they had demonstrated that they've got potential that, sort of seemed to undermine this sort of, notion that there's still pupil premium. So there's still going to be some issues within the home as such. And so, I think that we probably should do more, to sort of see how we identify potential research participants in a caring way. I think there's the other part of it as well, how we approach this stuff. Just read a book on sort of a caring approach to research, feminist caring approach to research that I just reviewed. So I'm using that language because I think it's important how we nurture, potential research participants. And I just think what the Urban Scholars Program does in creating this environment then allows particularly folks in education, which I don't think we've exploited enough, to come into that space and to design a caring research approach that we can then target to the schools. The coordinators are great. They're always happy to facilitate parents coming into the schools. Our parents love to come into the school when we come and meet them to tell them about the program. So there's all sorts of mechanisms that we could use to increase your sample. And we're talking about local schools. We're talking about 30 schools that we work with in and around London. Well, mostly North London, but we also have schools in South London as well. So as such, so I just want to say it's great. It really is great what you've done. And I think what we need to do in terms of impact on this type of work is to upscale a little bit. And I think that we've got the ability to do it, because we just don't join this stuff up enough. I'm also saying this politically because there's a question as to whether the Urban Scholars Program will continue to sit in the education department, which I think is a silly question, full stop. And so I know that Anne is in support of that, so we wait for her to come back. I know Tom is waiting for Anne's response. I know Sunita's being reluctant to say something particular, but I don't want them to use this as an opportunity to throw us in the marketing department and widening participation, which is what they'd like to do, actually, because they don't see the point of having us in the education department, which seems absurd to me. So, as I say, a bit controversial because I'm looking for some advocates and allies who may champion the placement of urban scholars within the context of the education department. So I'll stop there.
That's really interesting, Antoine. And a lot of what I agree with everything you're saying in terms of the caring approach and, often in terms of the work that within our own department we do, connecting different bits of it up. Often, everything, I suppose, the type of work we do, we sometimes don't make the connections that we can in the different elements of our work. And certainly, one thing we'll pick up in the next paper is the issue of time. The time to develop that caring approach and that nurturing relationship, which with so much research, because of timeframes, because of funding timeframes, and because of the pressures on our own time, let alone those of our participants, you cannot do it, unfortunately. So it is, where you've got that long-standing relationship with particular groups, it's about how we then draw research into that or make it a more sort of central component of that. It's really important.
Can I just add one more thing too, again, just being slightly political, because one of the things that I'm proposing, in terms of sort of saying how important it is for us to remain in the department is I'm really actually quite keen. I've spoken on the education BA a number of times, sort of looking at how you can get those students to see how that degree translates into work, because they're not, sort of getting a teacher qualification per se. And I've been thinking about the ambassadors who contribute to the Urban Scholars Program, who are great, but I think sometimes they think of themselves as kind of glorified babysitters. Whereas in fact, I think that those students who are doing the BA in education who have to do a placement, why wouldn't it be good for them to do the placement on the Urban Scholars Program, to create a link in terms of developing, particularly if they're there for 3 years doing the degree, even outside of a project or something, that they can build a relationship with the Urban Scholars Program in that way, so that they can see all the different ways in which an education degree can work within the context of research, within the context of student engagement, parental engagement, and then those students students can kind of be tasked with some research activities, perhaps, you know, because they're already there, they're already engaging. If we can keep, you know, a sort of a cohort of BA degree students within the Urban Scholars Program as sort of, you know, ambassadors, as it were. So they'd get paid, you know, through the job shop, but they would also have a particular kind of role in identifying and helping to develop research strategies that we can then use to undermine some of, you know, to sort of reduce some of that time, so that that kind of legwork isn't being done by senior researchers to a degree. So just throwing that out too.
Thanks, Antoine. And there are real opportunities here. I mean, Meredith actually started the session by talking about future funding opportunities that are coming up at Brunel. So we'll definitely bring you into those conversations. Thank you. I know Philip's got problems with Wi-Fi and he's dropped out, but he did put something in the chat about the language we're using around the kind of hard to reach terminology. Did you note that, Emma? I don't know if you wanted to respond or make any comment in relation to that point at all.
I think it's a really good one. I was reading something recently about, you know, we use this term hard to reach, but, you know, it's that puts the onus perhaps on those people we're trying to reach rather than on us. And I think that terminology is really important. You know, there were couple of nice papers by, is it Suzanne Wilkinson? I can't remember who I referenced, but about making sure certain groups aren't hard to research, you know, and thinking about that and making sure the onus isn't on those groups, or, you know, those groups who are so difficult to find. And, you know, it's just about doing it, if you like, in the right way, to be honest with you. Yeah, and sometimes we need to do things a little differently.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that point around timing and having the time to think and reflect on our engagement strategies is such an important part of that, to have the time and space. Are there any further questions, or shall we move along to our second paper? Okay, a few nods. So I'll move us along to our second paper, just to give a little bit of background to this. I mentioned that Emma and I, you know, our work really informed our thinking for the new project. And another piece of work that I was doing with my lovely colleagues Yue and Jia and Changqing. Welcome, it's so lovely to see you. Yue, who's based at Nottingham, Jia at UCL. And we were doing a piece of research trying to understand child voice experiences through the COVID pandemic. So we were using parents as co-researchers, getting them to do an activity with their child. Either we gave the opportunity to photograph or to produce a drawing. They all produced drawings because there probably wasn't really much to photograph because they couldn't go out of the house. And we managed to do quite a few interviews. I think we ended up with over 20 participants based across China and the UK. But what was really interesting is that looking at the demographics in that data, all of our families were middle class, reported themselves as being middle class. And we tried so many different strategies, we thought, to attract a more varied demographic, but we were unsuccessful. And so that piece of work made us really think about, well, why can't we get to these families, and what are some of the challenges here? So when the call came from the Institute for Communities and Societies, and it was very much an interdisciplinary call, we thought, okay, let's put all of these efforts together and see what we can come up with. So thinking about our team for the project that we're now going to present on, myself, Emma and Changqing, we all work in education. Yue and Jia work in early years. We've got sociologists, gender studies. Emma's obviously a geographer, and Jia has some experience of psychology. So we were able to draw in these different perspectives and approaches to frame and inform the project that we're now going to share a presentation. We're all going to take a little bit of a turn in presenting this, so it's going to jump around a bit. Hopefully it'll keep everyone motivated to keep listening, because I know it's quite a long time to be sitting still in front of a computer. I will share my screen now, and perhaps you can just let me know, Emma, if you can see it. Okay, so the title of our project is Engaging Low-Income Families in Education Research, and it's an interdisciplinary exploratory study. And as I've just mentioned, the team truly do represent a multitude of different areas and interests, and we think that this is a real strength in trying to bring together some understanding and moving towards maybe not best practice as such, but just ways of working that are more productive, more supportive, more understanding, more caring, the things that we've been talking about so far. What we wanted to do then was focus on how to engage and work with socio-economically disadvantaged parents, caregivers of young children. So we're looking at families from the ages 0 to 11. And, you know, for anyone who has children, they'll know that there's a real intensification of care work and parenting that's required for this age group. So that was why we were very interested to get younger children rather than older children, although we accept there are different challenges. And in China, we had to slightly increase our age range up to 12 to 13 in order to get enough participants, which we'll talk about. And we wanted to understand what these parents thought about education research. What did they think the purpose of it was? Why would they do it or not do it? What did they know about it in these two different country contexts? So we wanted to unpick the barriers and challenges and the issues impacting on socioeconomically disadvantaged parents and caregivers in terms of their participation. We wanted to really understand the nuance, and very much coming from a post-structural understanding of the contextual and situated challenges facing these families. We wanted to think about culture, class, gender, ethnicity, and their influence on these challenges. So, you know, was there a way that we could understand these challenges relationally to these aspects of identity and relationally to the intersections between these aspects of identity? So that was really at the heart of what we were trying to do. And we wanted to see what might support and encourage and enable these families to take part in research going forward. Were there things that we as researchers could do that would make participation much easier for them? All of this is framed around, you know, coming out of COVID and that period of time. And as I've mentioned, the studies that I've done with Emma and with Yue and Jia and Ching to bring together in this interdisciplinary project. So it's really about practical strategies to engage low-income families in education research. And we think this is so important because we really do want to argue here that we need to improve the representativeness of the findings and any recommendations that are made from research. We think that this can enhance research impact on a larger scale in terms of those big projects, because quite often what we end up with, I would argue, is a very particular, often very kind of middle class, privileged version and understanding of the social world and the challenges within it. So we just really wanted to problematize that and to understand it a little bit better. I'm now going to pass over to Refika, who is our research assistant on the project, who's just going to briefly talk to the literature that she's found in relation to the challenges and the understanding that exists already.
Okay, hi. Thank you, Kate. So these categories are made based on the wide research with the literature with low-income families. So including health research and nutrition, financial and educational research. So we try to kind of adapt the categories like that. With the first one, with the personal and family category, that one is like including the time and stress factor, because these families have expressed their frustration over the time. They are not able to manage their time, and also between the home and also childcare responsibilities as well as the job. So there is also socioeconomic constraints such as financial struggles they have, and also food insecurity, as well as access to educational sources and books, etc. we can mention here, and also in terms of background as well. So there is language, for instance, they are not able to express their feelings feeling they are not able to express themselves better in the English as a second language. So in terms of the practical barriers, we can mention the employment, because they have the job, and there is also in job insecurity in terms of low-income families when they are trying to book health appointments or during their job time, and also when they are trying to take any time out from the work, they are not they are not paid usually, and then they have this stress of losing their wage at that day. So this is also another barrier to participate in the research. And also they have responsibilities to daycare, the house care, and also childcare. So we can also mention that the transportation issues, if they need to go to other places for research, to participate in the research, they do live challenges, especially when they have small kids or and also other responsibilities. It is not that easy for them, because they also need to take their children from school, especially when there is extracurricular activities as well. So accessibility to access to technology, they don't have usually access to technology. So as also when they are giving some task to like record, video recording or other things, they leave difficulty. These are the challenges, not just barriers at the same time. And also we can also mention here the school education related challenges or barriers. Their education level is affecting, as well as their previous experience in education, negative experience, especially I refer to here. Also, relationship with the school as parents, their relationship to school is affecting them, their involvement in the research as well. When we come to the research-related barriers, I can mention the reluctance here, because when they identified, as also Emma talked about it, there's one a bit, when they identified as being labeled as deficient or incompetent parents, or low income, disadvantaged, poor, these also make them reluctant to join any research. Also, there is confidence issue. So there is, because there is, in terms of these families, there is high rates of formal health and social care interventions. They are also not feeling confident to join research, and also do not trust, especially in one research was saying, for instance, when the family is having social care workers regularly, interns, and whose research we will give at the end with the references. So this family did want to join the research first, and then the camera handed over to the family by the researcher, but this family give that camera to a care workers without thinking, like there was no connection between this care worker visiting the family, but this family assumed they are together. So there is this assumption of seeing researchers as a part of government or other institutions. So it creates this challenge as well. And lastly, understanding the research. This research that we looked in the literature shows these families don't have enough understanding of research. They do not know, or they don't understand the purpose of research when the researchers giving them the information. And also they may not necessarily have research experience, and then feel not confident to join to research. So if we move to the next slide, I will just also mention a bit the strategies. So there is also in this literature strategies to encourage parental participation in research. So some of them are used access through institutions that research that parents are familiar with, such as schools or other centers, child centers, for instance. So there is also familiar face. Some researchers used because there's difficulties to get access to these families. They are used the familiar face when they are data collecting, when they are making data collection with these families, and they were present in their research group. So there is also free daycare services offered to them, or monetary compensation as a strategies, and also inside the researcher can be benefits for the data collection, as the researcher, the literature indicates. Also, the convenient time, place, and data collection techniques are important, because it is also important for all data collection technique, all data collection in the research, but especially with the low-income families, there is more consideration needed. So I can say so. Thank you. I finished mine. Over to G, I guess.
I think it's back to me, and then it's going to Emma and Yue. Thank you so much, Refika. So just briefly to sketch out what we actually did. Our data collection included 11 in-person interviews that we carried out with parents and caregivers in England. In London, we focused on Greater London. And then there were 10 online interviews that happened in China, in Beijing. I think this is a really good example of the differences in the enactment of COVID policies. And of course, we know that you're going to talk about that, and how China, still parts of China now, have just recently gone back into lockdown, where of course the context in England has been very different over the past year. And we managed online interviews with 5 stakeholders in England, again in London, and in China, in Beijing. We had some key variables. So in England, the annual family income of 7,400 or less was used again. That was a marker that Emma and I used in our previous project, and we do recognise it's problematic, but we wanted to we needed to come up with some criteria, and we wanted to be transparent in our criteria. And in China, it was meeting one or more of the following. So an annual family income of 11,000 or less, 100,000 RMB, high school education level or lower, and disability also became a key variable, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We didn't have very long, and it's one of the challenges that Emma was alluding to collect our data. So we only had a couple of months in order to set up these interviews and very quickly undertake them. But we did manage to get quite a bit of depth and breadth in the data, as you'll see when we start to share some of our findings with you. Okay, I will move to the next slide and the UK context.
I think that's me, isn't it? I'm going to just say something briefly about the UK context, which, as Kate just mentioned, is we're working in London, in the Greater London area. So Kate, Refika, and me were focusing on London, and really this took the form of Kate and me approaching gatekeepers, existing gatekeepers that we had worked with on very different projects. And that we had connections with, and that we knew worked with low-income families. And 2 of the gatekeepers we approached, or the organisations, were very enthusiastic about the research that we were doing, about our work and what we were trying to do with it, especially because both of them also would do their own sort of in-house research studies sometimes, and they had also found similar difficulties in not accessing necessarily participants, but sustaining interest in research and getting participants to complete research. So we worked with gatekeepers. We interviewed gatekeepers as stakeholders in the research, which was a very important first step in order to understand the context from which they were working. And then we used from those interviews, we used those to disseminate details of our project to the wider community group, wider community leaders, to encourage participation. It again was a very slow process. Even though we had those initial contacts, it was still a slow process, and it was a process of going back to these gatekeeper organisations time and again And it's difficult as a researcher because you recognize that our priorities are not the priorities of gatekeepers necessarily at all. So although our research is our priority for us, it's not for them. And so it was a process of going back, but hopefully doing that in a sensitive way that wasn't asserting too much or any pressure really. So it's about being persistent. And with one group, that persistence, if you like, from that came an invitation to attend a group, a community group, where a lot of low-income families, mothers in particular, where they attended with their children. And so it was Kate and Refika that went along in person and attended that group over a number of weeks and spoke to kind of those short interviews could be conducted with families there. So that contact, that persistence was really important. It's also a very kind of delicate process, I would suggest as well. In terms of the geographic challenges, we know that London, West London, is an area of real contrast, real socio-economic contrast. So it was a matter of really thinking about and then approaching and working with stakeholders who would be working in those relevant areas so that we could pick up the demographic that we wanted to, and other ideas that we had for potential gatekeeper organizations didn't come to anything because of the, looking at that socioeconomic data, looking at that demographic makeup, that we weren't going to be able to get the particular families that we were looking for. So those were the particular challenges within sort of the Greater London area that we experienced. And I'll hand over to Yue for the China context.
Thanks, Emma. So in the Chinese context, when we try to access participants and stakeholders in Beijing, there are some contextual specific challenges that emerged. To start with, first of all, we encountered this challenge that even defining low-income families in the Beijing context turns out to be challenging as compared to the rest of China, and perhaps to London as well, because following some very recent policies in Beijing in particular, there are some changes in the landscape of population comprised in this big city and the capital of the country, and one in particular related to a large group of low economic background families which are migrants in Beijing. When I say migrants, it's not people from other countries into China, but it's more from rural areas of China moving to Beijing and other big cities to work. And I think there's a bunch of other research on Chinese left behind children that is related to this, but not as much about parents themselves in terms of engaging with educational research, but they are a large group of people suffering when they moved to big cities in terms of their economic and social status. And also linking to that, there's this census record system in the Chinese context where each individual is linked to a census record in a particular city or town or village, and that will allow you access to welfare, quality education, healthcare system, and many other benefits in our state system in the Chinese context. And having a census record in Beijing is already regarded as prestige itself if we talk about socioeconomic status, and a lot of people in the Beijing context to be regarded as relatively low income and marginalized would be those who do not have a census record of Beijing city, but they still live and work in Beijing. And as I said before, following some policies in Beijing in the past years, especially before the COVID, following some disasters like a fire disaster and things, a lot of those people are swapped out of the city for many political and social reasons. So some of our stakeholders have reported that people who are able to remain in Beijing are no longer low social status or low economic status. So that already has this Beijing specific context of finding participants that could be categorized into this category. That's why Kate mentioned just now, we expand that both in terms of income, but also are extending that to other marginalized groups living in Beijing, such as those with disabilities. But even that, we've only been able to reach participants who have disabilities, but in the meantime, they have Beijing census record. They are relatively affluent in terms of economic incomes and status, but still marginalized in other ways, which we will talk a bit more later in our findings by Jie. So that's the geographical challenges, which we regard more as the Beijing context issues when we try to access participants. The other part is also the gatekeepers. We do manage to find a few organizations and charities in Beijing that could help us reach participants who fit into our refined, broader category. I should say here, another thing, actually linking back to a geographical challenge, we've come across many, we've been able to get in touch with many charities in Beijing, such as Save for Children Beijing office. However, they don't work with parents and families in Beijing. They work with children and families in other parts of China, particularly those remote areas that are regarded as low socioeconomic status. So that's another geographical challenge, but also gatekeeper challenge. Apart from that, Jie will talk more about trust in terms of how gatekeepers become very protective and sensitive when trying to allow us access to the people they are working with. That's one aspect. The other aspect is also we see in both positive and negative sense, if I use this binary construction of positive and negative, the gatekeepers that we worked with have their own very strong subjective understanding of what research means, and also the meanings produced through the educational process, which, as I say, in a positive sense, that really made us rethink why we are doing this research, how we do this research, what kind of questions are appropriate to ask based on their opinions. Again, Jie will say a little bit more later. On a difficult side, it becomes a challenging situation where Emma touched on this a little bit as well, like what we want or what we think are important for this project may not necessarily be what they want. And some examples of this could be from a researcher herself who are able to link us to a lot of people with disabilities. Is when she was doing the interviews with us, instead of talking about how to engage those families and parents in educational research, she ended up talking a lot about her personal experiences throughout that interview and how that matters to her and how that matters to those parents she worked with, because she's kind of been regarded as a role model by others, being university professor and successful researcher herself, but also a person identified with disabilities. So there are those subjectivities of gatekeepers really affecting how we access and who we can access in this process. And again, as I said, Jie might be able to talk a little bit more later when we share findings from China. So that's the challenges from the Chinese part. Thanks.
That's lovely. Thank you so much, Yue and Emma. What we're going to do now is just talk very briefly about some of our initial themes. And I must stress, we are now working through the analysis. We haven't carried out any systematic data analysis as yet. We've really fleshed out the key themes that we want to share with you. In the UK context, these are grouped around shame and fear. And in the Chinese context, it's lack of confidence and nervousness. And then we also talk about the issue of Practicalities, which we think go across both of those contexts. So just to start us off thinking about some of the barriers to participation, the theme of shame has come out very strongly in our data, and Emma has talked about this already in the first presentation. We have Ava, the stakeholder that we talked to, and I've got a couple of really nice quotes from her here. This was one of the first interviews that I had done to try to understand why might it be a challenge to get some of the families that you work with to actually even just consider being interviewed. And she said, well, some of them are scared that if they talk about it, their kids might get taken away. There was a really strong fear around intervention from social services. She said, that's a really common one. I don't want social care to be involved. They'll take my children away. Actually, social care won't take the children away unless it's absolutely desperate. So something around talking about participating in any kind of research, there's a fear, and I think Yue just mentioned this, that actually researchers are part of government and they're conceptualized as being part of the apparatus of the state, if you like. And this is something that definitely came up with our interviews with parents, that we really had to reassure them around the ethics process and procedures, that we would protect their data, that they could trust us, that nothing would be shared. So that kind of sense of social care, of the arm of the state, if you like, in these families' lives, and the fear of what that could do for their family, just meant it was a risk too far, that it was a sense of shame. They didn't want to talk about their children. And she also went on to extend this point and say, actually, they feel sometimes, and they're led to believe, that they're failing as a mum. And that's what we do differently. So she was talking about her stakeholder organisation. She says, you know, we're not there to judge them. We try and big them up, if anything. I've got lots of families that will say to me, I've done nothing today. All I've done is got dressed. You know, to me, is you've got 3 children under the age of 5. That's really positive in my eyes. You've got dressed. Yesterday, you might not have got dressed. So we try and big them up. And in that way, what we can see through our stakeholder organisations is the way that they work to reduce any sense of stigma, judgment, and to support these families. And what we found through our research is that because our family participants trust our stakeholders so much, it's really only through those bonds of trust that they will be willing to talk to us as researchers. And when we went, as Emma mentioned, to the playgroup, to the centre, it was only because the girls that were there every week, the key workers were saying, no, it's okay. These people are here to talk to you. It's okay. You're safe. Everything will be held securely. So that sense of being judged, that sense of fear about their children being taken away, bound up in this discourse of shame that was experienced by our families, is a really powerful barrier to participating in research that we need to break through and to take account of when we're trying to work with those families. And I'll move now to the next slide.
Thanks, Kate. I think this sense of shame that Kate was just talking about is also so tightly rolled together with fear, a sense of fear that families have. So I think some of the quotes here really kind of tally with what Kate's just been talking about. Because both the parents and stakeholders we've spoken to discussed the issue of fear in different ways. Fear of not knowing enough to participate. So for Sophie, the mother here, leading to a discomfort and also a lack of trust. Really, really important, you know, the sense of, again, going back to the previous paper as well, just fear that, you know, they don't know enough. And I think this is very much something that is linked to socioeconomic status, obviously previous levels of education, and so on. And for many of the parents, especially in the geographical area where we were researching, language was an issue, and this came up through the literature that Refika spoke about. Fear of not understanding what is being asked of you. So therefore being a fear of being, you know, shown up if you are in a research situation, because you don't understand what you need to do and what's being asked. Both Priya and Claire, the stakeholders here, came from a social housing agency, and a social housing agency I've worked with, you know, for many years now. And they spoke about, I suppose, really about our own position as researchers, but this also goes for them in their role as individuals who work for a social housing agency. It's about the fear of judgment that certainly as a university, it's about thinking about our own research, our own position, you know, going in to talk to a particular group of people, that sense that they're being judged by us, by the all-knowing academics from university, and judged negatively, certainly. But even Priya and Claire spoke about how when they'd done their own in-house research, this was something that they struggled with. So even when those connections are there that Kate's just been talking about, it is still very difficult to break down this barrier to participation. And then the final point from Claire, I think, is a really important one. It's not knowing on the part of the participants whether participating in research will change anything, will improve anything. And again, that's a mistrust of what research does, or perhaps very often doesn't do. So, you know, why should I be involved in research? Because actually it's not going to lead to any change, and certainly any change for my situation, for my circumstances. So therefore there's a real reluctance to participate because of that, because they're not going to see anything come from that, or the fear that the only thing they'll see is something that's negative and reflects badly on them.
Thank you, Kate and Emma. And so I'm going to share some themes emerged from the Chinese data. And actually, the two themes emerged here are very similar to the fear and also the shame, the two themes that emerged from the English data, but we think that actually they are manifested in different ways in the Chinese context. So the first is kind of like those parents and caretakers' sense of that they don't have the confidence, they don't think that they are qualified to talk with educational researchers about educational issues. So Xin is a grandfather who is taking care of the two grandsons of his daughter. His daughter had the first son at the age of 17 and is still unemployed. So she is also like financially dependent on the grandfather. So when I asked the grandfather about like issues about educational research, he was kind of like, I don't know about education. I'm really bad at speaking. I don't know how to answer. So he was very apologetic through the whole interview, which makes me feel really sorry, because I think that it is because our questions are really irrelevant to his life and to his needs. But at the end, we did have a really good chat about his two grandsons, which he opened up and had a lot to say. So I think through this experience, it makes us to reflect on the priority, as Emma just mentioned, like the priority of the research, or does it actually match the needs and the priority of our participants and also our stakeholders. And when I asked about Xin that why he chose to take part in this educational research, which he had no idea what research is, he said that because the group leader of the charity asked him whether he would do her a favor, and he thought that because the group leader had given so much to his grandsons, so he wanted to give something back. This also makes us think that as researchers, it is really important for us to work with these institutions and the charities, but at the same time, we really need to make sure that our research, our aims and our questions are really match the priority of these institutions and also meet the needs of our participants. And a Chinese mother said like she actually had a lot to say about education, but she said like the problem for her is, or the barriers for her is that she couldn't find the right language. So she felt like she couldn't express her very well, which also makes us think that the language that we use during our interview or during our research, how we frame our research, how we introduce our research to our participants to make them feel that they are confident, they are empowered to speak up and to have their voice heard. And Lin is another Chinese mother. We had an interview scheduled at 7:30 in the evening, but she messaged me at around 7 o'clock saying that could we start the interview now because I'm too nervous. So we started the interview, and she said like what makes her feel difficult to participate in research is in educational research is that she don't feel like she is qualified to talk about education with her children. She feel like she is a bad mother, like she doesn't know how to educate her children. But after the chatting, it's kind of make her to feel like more comfortable about talking about her experience, and not like we as researchers as this superior educational experts that are going to judge her. So in the end, she said like, now after talking with you, I'm no longer nervous. And at first I was really nervous, which is related to the next theme that is also very evident in the Chinese data. Kate, would you mind? Yeah, thank you. So Fa, the Chinese mother, also mentioned that a barrier that she felt is the nervousness, that she didn't know what to say and whether it is the right thing to say or not. But we had like some off-topic chats about educational issues that she is interested about, like how to, you know, deal with the emotional like issues with her children. And also when at first I used this word like interview, but later on I just started to use words like have a chat, just to talk about, to change the language to make her feel more relaxed. So later on, towards the middle of the interview, he said like it's more relaxing than I expected. So before our chats, I felt a bit nervous, but actually it is rather relaxing and I feel happy about it, which I think makes us to reflect on all the procedures that we are familiar with during research. So we have this very long, detailed, complicated information sheets, and also a very formal consent form, which sometimes can be off-putting, which I think Emma and Kate will reflect on later more. And also we use these very professional or formal words, say interview, survey, questionnaire, which sometimes can sound very intimidating for our participants, which makes them feel like maybe I can't do it. But actually they can, and we want to hear their voice. And also it makes us feel like maybe we can kind of like take off our researcher hat and to be less professional, just like a friend to have a chat, like Rafika mentioned, like maybe a familiar face, although we are a stranger, but we can be more easygoing and not act like a researcher, but rather than a person who is genuinely interested in what they are thinking about and what they are talking about. And also it makes me think that sometimes like those off-topic conversation can be very meaningful and helpful, because when talking about like research, which is actually very irrelevant to all our Chinese participants who were their first time to participate in a research. So when we talk about research, we didn't get much data, like we didn't get much like many answers. But if we can move from research to talk about the education, how the time they spent with their children, actually our participants can open up. And after that, we actually get more valuable data than just stick to the research questions that we started with. So these are the two themes that we found from the Chinese data. And I think I'm going to hand over to Emma to talk about the practicalities.
Thanks, Gia. Yes, two very practical points really here to pull out of the data that we got from London. First is around the location of the interview, you know, barriers commuting, the distance between where you are, where they are, and this is often a distance as well that's not just kind of geographical distance, but it also kind of compounds a sense that there's a greater distance in where you are coming from and your backgrounds and so forth. So participants are less likely if they need to go somewhere, less likely to attend if they need to go somewhere, even if an incentive is being paid. So as we mentioned in London, it was Kate and Refika went repeated times to a group run by a local charity, in spite of not knowing who would be there on each of the mornings, and picking up participants there with the support of the individuals from the charity who are running the group. And I think this is important because sometimes as researchers, we are so keen to ensure our participants, of course, know what they are discussing in advance. They've seen the participant information sheet, they've seen the consent form, they've had all of that, they've signed it all and so forth. But actually that potentially acts as a little bit of a barrier. And again, it puts a bit of a distance between you and your participant, in terms of you being the researcher with all this, you know, Gia's just talking about now, the language that we use and that we are required, I suppose, to use as researchers. But again, that puts a distance between us and our research participants. Secondly, from what Ava talks about here, is that actually even when we are interviewing online, I was talking about some of the benefits earlier, there are also disadvantages. This does not fit with some families. The example here is that, you know, with children in the background, 8 children, it just doesn't work within the home space. Again, going back to the previous paper, thinking about where is the most comfortable place for somebody to talk. And often that means that we do need to make that effort as researchers to go and find that comfortable place that works for families. And that takes time, okay? And it's about finding the right space. So we as researchers need to be mindful of these practicalities, and really it's us that needs to make the effort to really think about and have those initial discussions, especially with stakeholders, about what's best here, what's in the interests of the group that we're researching.
Thank you, Emma. So actually, the practicality barriers or difficulties mentioned by the Chinese parents and caretakers are very similar to those mentioned by the English caretakers as well. And there are a range of difficulties which also have been demonstrated in the literature as well. And what is quite interesting here is that we found actually families are very different. So like families with disadvantaged backgrounds or low income, or the different terms we use, they are not a homogeneous group. They even as researchers will set these working definitions or these problematic criteria when we do these participant recruitments. They are very different from each other, and they have different needs and different circumstances. So when we try to approach them or reach out to them, we really needed to be mindful for the differences among these families. And when asked some of our participants about whether they think that mothers or fathers are more likely to participate in this educational research, all the mothers said that mothers were more likely to take part because they were the main caretaker of the family, and it's kind of their responsibility to be involved in these child-related activities. But we do have a father mentioned that he had this equal responsibility with his wife, and they shared all the caretaking responsibilities. So he said like it just depends who had the time. Kate, would you mind moving to the next slides? Yeah, thank you. So these slides, we wanted to share with you two quotes, one from a stakeholder, the charity leader I just mentioned, and also the father I just mentioned, which we would like to highlight two things. The first is the heterogeneity of the families that we are intending to approach and reach out. The other is, I think we had a really lovely discussion about the hard to reach, hard to research, and or underreach or underserved like groups. So from our interview, all of our Chinese parents, it was their first time to take part in the research, and it was also the first time that they were approached about taking part in a research. So actually, even though they wanted to take part or they had the motivation to be more involved in educational activities, involve their children, they don't have the opportunities. As researchers, we always talk about it's very difficult or there are so many barriers, but I would say like, actually very small number of researchers actually are making the extra effort to reach out to these people. So it's not that they don't want to participate, it's that they were not approached or they don't have the opportunity, which I think really makes us think, and also relates to what we just mentioned about like how we can like approach these families. We don't want to be patronizing, rather that we would want to empower them and give them the opportunity and the platform to have their voice heard. So I think this is what we wanted to reflect while we talk about these practicalities. And Kate, if you just move to, yeah. So we also had these very lovely long quotes from the Chinese stakeholder of the charity group, and she talked a lot about the trust and the rapport between researcher and the participants, and also the trust between her group and her parents, as Yue just mentioned, and I think Yue is going to chip in to talk more about this.
Thanks, Jie. I think you have touched on the main things here. The list quote is really a good summary of one of those two challenges. One is the trust relationships, and the other is the educational level or the language our participants may have in relation to educational research. So I won't say much more about that, but what is here also relating to practicalities, more the broader social and ideological context in China when we're talking about doing research with participants in this kind of topic, and also bearing in mind the fact that these are involved with a comparison with England and with two, although we are Chinese ourselves, but we are like UK-based researchers. So the trusting atmosphere, apart from generally what you have all said about the relationships between researchers and the participants, there's also another layer in the Chinese context when those research have been conducted by foreigners in some sense, and how that added another caution when our gatekeepers are linking us to the participants. So that's another practical aspect when we're doing this kind of research in China, and also the kind of power relations implied in this when we going to do this, and both the power relations implied in terms of us with the participants, and also the gatekeepers with the participants, and also us with the gatekeepers. Here, like this particular stakeholder, she has been pushing really hard to insist that she will have to be at every interview and co-conducting all those interviews with us for the reasons we have discussed. in this particular case, we haven't went on that route for various reasons in terms of the time limits, but also the pros and cons we considered that might emerge, such as the stakeholder subjectivities coming into the process and how that might lead to the shift in terms of what our participants tell us and things like that. So we haven't gone that route, but definitely something for longer discussions and in-depth analysis in our project and beyond. So that's another layer of practicalities in terms of ideological control in the Chinese context and the power relationships that come with that. So I'll just stop here and hand it back to Emma and Kate for summaries. Thanks.
Thanks, Yue. I'll be quite brief with this slide, I think, because I think what we've heard and through the quotes has been so rich, but hopefully it shows that these barriers are complex and they are specific to context and demographic cohort. And it is vital to recognise them to ensure research is inclusive and relevant, which is obviously what we've been, setting out to do. And it's been really useful to compare and contrast these two different geographic contexts, see the similarities between them, but also where things are a little, where things diverge a little bit. What emerges, though, are characteristics that make research and research participation more appealing to low-income groups, low-income families. And some of them we've just put together here on this slide as an initial way of thinking. So having research topics that are seen and considered, perceived to be highly relevant to the people we're talking to. And that takes a recognition that, as we've said, our priorities are not the same necessarily as theirs in terms of what we're doing with our work research, and in terms of the gatekeepers as well. And it's about how we relay what we are doing in our research to the people who we want to research, how we go about doing that. Being flexible in the time and the ways that we communicate and accommodate the needs of the particular groups. So, as we've heard with this project in London, going to them was really critical, through play groups, through drop-in centres, really making that connection, developing that rapport. With Chinese parents, as we've heard from Jia and Yue, it's about recognising different needs and different preferences of those individuals and those individual families, and working with that to ensure that they can participate in research. And I think research is important that can provide an immediate benefit to participants. It's really important. What are they going to get from it? Why should they bother? Okay, we're going to give them a £25 shopping voucher, but there needs to be something a little bit more. Often that's something such as a children's activity, for example, where, to participate, they are there, they are in that space, it's a safe space for them. But also sometimes it's about developing parental knowledges and skills about a particular topic, about a particular research area. And then, of course, it's this about not grabbing and going, really, with research, isn't it? Again, Kate will mention in a minute, frustration of timeframes and budgets don't always allow this, but it's about following up and thinking about what practical impacts for those people you have been interviewing. What can the practical impacts be? This takes time and this takes thought, and it takes a longer time frame of working with these individuals that, frustratingly for us, we don't always get. So it's a real challenge for researchers on how and whether some of this can be done. That's so important to ensure that the research, especially in education, in the field of education, has that rich diversity that we're looking for.
Lovely, thank you all so very much. I've got a very brief slide. I will be very quick here so we have a few minutes for questions. Some of our key reflections then and takeaway messages, and I think we've talked about this all the way through, but we as a team have been really increasingly talking about maybe we need to secure verbal consent. That might be easier for some of these families and carers to achieve than written consent. It was certainly the case for Refika and I when we went into the playgroups and we brought out all our forms, and there are children running around and people trying to get cups of tea and talk and catch up, that it was a sense of quite formal. And as soon as then we were asking them for their signature, it's, well, why do I need to sign this? What am I going to do with it? And there was a real cultural dimension to that as well, because we had a real cultural mix in terms of those attending the playgroup. And for some of our participants, signing a form and giving their phone number was going to be really problematic for lots of kind of cultural reasons. So these ethical concerns suggest that we need to go back, we need to think again about how the ethics process works to include or exclude. And of course, we know all of this comes in a context, I would argue, where institutions are tightening up on ethics and want more and more, I feel, evidence and paperwork to support ethical applications. We've talked about trusted gatekeepers. They are so key to successful access. We needed those gatekeepers. Again, as I said, when Refika and I were in the playgroup, it was those women telling participants, no, it's okay, you'll be okay, they'll look after you, and you can stop at any time, you don't have to proceed, that made those parents take that leap of faith, if you like, and take part in an interview. And yeah, Emma's right, we gave them all a voucher, but that's not enough. And on that, Amazon vouchers, it turns out, are not preferred. So we're going with Tesco vouchers now on all of our future projects, and a similar alternative in the Chinese context. Being less professional, being less formal, again, the ethics process, but just in our manner. There's no point turning up, not that any of us did, but I certainly didn't, in a twin set with pearls. Jeans, t-shirt, casual, feeling that they can kind of speak to you, relate to you, that you're approachable, not beyond them, certainly not looking down on them, showing them respect. Gia mentioned the off-topic conversations. It's really helpful to do that. I found myself at one point in an interview, which I loved, holding a baby, giving it milk so that the mum could deal with the other child, asking about their children, being available, being helpful, getting involved. I think these are all really important things. And we've said a few times now about the funding timeframes, and it absolutely doesn't support us going in and developing these relationships. So in an ideal world, we may have gone to the playgroup 2 or 3 times, helped out, played with the children, been there with the parents, and then approached them and asked them about interviewing when they had a sense of trust and faith in the relationship that they were developing. And this is something that we need to think about, because funding councils, all of us are under time pressure. Funding councils encourage us to do more in less time, and research is so competitive. How do we reconcile that with working with these marginalized groups where we need more time to develop more meaningful relationships of trust? Okay, thank you. I said half an hour, but somehow we're at 12:53, so we've gone on a bit. I really thank everybody for sticking with the presentation. We do have 5 minutes. We will finish promptly at 1 o'clock, but we do have 5 minutes for burning questions and comments. So I'm going to open it up to you. Or is everyone just desperate for lunch now?
Thank you very much, Kate. Shall I kick off? I've been writing notes sort of all over the place, and I just think that these two pieces of research that you've undertaken really do shine a light on the complexities and the multiple layers involved when you have to navigate a range of cultural sensitivities on the one hand, and then vulnerabilities on the other. And this notion of breaking down barriers and the perceptions of them and us. And I think the other point that really came to light, and I think you've in part addressed it in your final slide, and this has to do with, jumping through the ethical hoops. I can't imagine what your paperwork and documentation looked like in order to get that go-ahead, for this, but it would not have been a linear process, I'm sure.
it's a challenge. And of course, you know, we had to get all our material translated into Chinese. Emma and I are learning a lot about Mandarin through this project, which is wonderful. But seriously, there's so many institutional hoops to jump through. And we had to get approval through Brunel, and then we had to work with GIA and UA to ensure that approval covered China. So there is a lot of paperwork, and it seems to me that every year there's more and more paperwork and more ethical things that we should be worrying about that maybe don't speak to actually working with some of the most vulnerable families in our society. I don't know if anyone else has a comment.
Just gonna
Hi,
say,
Kate and everyone. It was lovely. Sorry, Emma. And I think that is this notion currently with research, and it comes up with and you've covered that as well, is giving back to the communities and is thinking about our positionality. And we all talk a lot about decolonization, and is that element of how we eventually decolonize those research methodologies. And yes, we need to deliver for research frameworks, but essentially I always see myself not as someone who delivers research, but someone who gives that space for those marginalized, oppressed, intensified communities to essentially be heard, because they're not. And we are the only space where we can make their voices heard. And we have the privilege of the fact that we can actually talk about that now, and with the fact that we're able to do that research, it shows that is not so much about us, and you've said that a lot, is about them, and for us finding that space and empowering their voice to be heard, and how we fight back eventually those time frameworks and those research policies that we all need to do to eventually let them know that this is what our role is, not to eventually deliver those outcomes, but giving them the space. And I don't have an answer. It's about thinking how we position our research frameworks and signifies. And again, picking up what Antoine said, the importance of remaining, having their scholars within the education department. And as educationalists, we all have that passion of empowering voices and the importance of doing that. But it really makes you think. And thanks for all of the information and colleagues who shared the research today.
Thanks so much, Yanis. I think you're absolutely right. And we do need to work on decolonizing the research process. And we also need to look at the entanglements between that challenge and class and status and socioeconomic privilege, and how these things become bound up together and intensified for certain groups of the community and populations. Yue, did you want to come in?
I think you covered almost all the things, but just when you were saying, so it's Genius, sorry if I pronounce your name wrongly, Genius, yeah, about decolonizing research and ethics. I just can't, going back to the final point Katie said about we're thinking about using oral consent in terms of written consent. That comes up as one thing, not just for this project, but oftentimes when we are doing research in China to meet the ethical requirements by a UK institution, whereas also to enable us to do research with Chinese participants. That then comes strongly, as Kate said, about these cultural differences and cultural elements. For many Chinese, especially at this level, you ask them to sign something so formal on a paper, that's not going to happen. And we've got so many cases when we say, you need to sign this form before we can do any research, and then they just completely disappeared after that. So there are a lot to talk about here in terms of decolonizing the ethical procedures and requirements. As well. That's just a quick sort intrigued by your mention this term. Yeah.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much. Oh, thank you, Antoine, for the reference. That is absolutely wonderful, and thank you, Ellie, for your comment. I mean, you're absolutely right. We build these relationships, and it is about how to end those. And I think that's something that we're going to think about. Those relationships of trust, and maybe that's something for another project team, I don't know. Look, we're just at 1 minute to 1 o'clock. I know everyone needs tea, sandwiches, movement breaks, etc. So I'm going to draw it to a close. I want to thank Brunel once again and ICS for funding this research. I want to thank you all for coming, and thanks to Gia and Yue, Emma, Refika, and to Cheng Ching, who's not here, for being such wonderful colleagues to work with. Thank you all very much, and I will stop the recording and close it down now. And see you all soon, I hope.
Thank you,
as well,
everyone.
Kate.
Enjoy the rest of your day.